Good afternoon. I'd like to thank OECD and MEXT for my invitation here. I'm hoping this afternoon that my presentation is going to be at least a little bit useful to you from a practical perspective in the implementation of your new curriculum. I'm from Australia, and particularly I'm from Melbourne, which is right down here. And for Australia, the law states that education is managed by each of these 6 states and territories. So each of these individually organise curriculum, which doesn't really make much sense because we're a country of 24 million people, so we don't have many people, but we have 8 different authorities organising the same thing, the same curriculum. So it's taken us many years, but it was finally agreed that we would try to create a national curriculum because it was going to be more efficient from a number of perspectives in terms of curriculum development and management, and particularly sharing of ideas of teachers across the country, because we are a very big country and often teachers do not have access to a central place to be able to have training. So we range from schools in the country that may only have students in a whole school of 5 students to very large schools in the city of over 3,000 students. So we have very many different types of schools and different types of situations. Initially, our curriculum was based on what was called the Melbourne Declaration. So the Melbourne Declaration was a document that all states and territories read and thought about, and it formed the basis of curriculum development. So whereas we used to simply be concerned about the different disciplines, whether it was maths or science or English, whatever it might be, the Declaration made a very profound difference in that it said that knowledge is not just about knowledge and skills, and it is important to still have knowledge and skills and advanced learning and the ability to create new ideas, but it is also about general capabilities that are going to underpin future learning. So things like flexible and creative thinking, things like the capacity to work with other people, things like the ability to move across subject domains and to be able to solve problems. That was what the Melbourne Declaration said was important for education. And that Melbourne Declaration was informed by teachers, it was informed by authorities, it was informed by parents, it was informed by students. So there were a lot of people involved in that document. Following that document, its particular goals that were stated there was that there were 2 major goals for any education in Australia, and that is that we promoted excellence and equity for all students, and also that all Australians became successful learners, confident and creative individuals, and active and informed citizens. So they were the goals for education. Then the states and territories got together at a national level to try and develop the curriculum based on those goals. So how do we translate a policy document into a curriculum? First of all, in Australia, we have education from birth. So we have a birth to age 5 framework that is really based on the notion that all children have the entitlement to have a good start in life so that they have a better future for themselves as well as for the nation. And in our early learning framework, there are 5 outcomes that we try to achieve, so that we want children between those ages to have a strong sense of identity, to connect with and contribute to their world, to have a strong sense of well-being. They're confident and involved learners, and they're effective communicators. And the way that the curriculum is organised at those levels is that we focus on play-based learning. So those children can still be children, they can play, but through play they can explore and inquire and observe and do some of those scientific thinking skills that we like to encourage right through. Our curriculum then at a national level also went from what we call the compulsory schooling years. That is from what we call foundation, so that's about age 5, through to year 10. So that's about age 15, 16. And in the national curriculum, we still had the focus on learning areas. So there are 8 learning areas there. We had what was defined as general capabilities. So these are the 21st learning century skills. These are the competencies that are going to enable students to be able to participate in a world beyond school. their work skills, their personal skills as adults. And we also had cross-curriculum priorities, which go right across the curriculum, and that when curriculum developers were developing their courses, they had to keep in mind that there were important aspects. So looking at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, so having our Indigenous peoples being recognised. Recognising our local neighbours, so Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia. And the notion of sustainability. There were three things that ran across the curriculum. So when we developed the Australian curriculum, as you have done with your curriculum, we have aims, we have guidelines, and the particular difference we wanted to make was to move from a situation where we had transmissive learning and pedagogy through to an emphasis on greater inquiry. So that was our big move, moving away from that transmissive idea of teaching through to inquiry, and that was a big shift. And that it requires a lot of time to think about how you might do that and to develop the confidence to be able to do that. So with our science aims, and they've listed there, the major thing there was that the science curriculum should foster an interest in science and a curiosity and willingness to speculate about and explore the world. So that curiosity was really important about that. And we therefore wanted students to be able to investigate and have the confidence to investigate and the skills to investigate. And most particularly, what our research found was that students were going to make meaning when they could see the meaning as applied in their daily lives. And if they could see the connections to other people and in a sense of a global world. So in moving from a transmissive to a more engaging type style of teaching, we looked at the involvement of the teacher and the student. So we can define different types of inquiry and a move away from transmissive, where it's the teacher that provides a problem, it's the teacher that provides a procedure, it's the teacher that provides a solution, through to the ideal state that we would like, where the students themselves create what the question is that they would like to investigate, they understand and create the methodologies, and they can actually come up with a solution and justify their own solutions. So sometimes it goes into different stages. This starts even at the age of 5. That with very simple investigations, students can go through that particular process. And most generally, and the most easy, or perhaps the easiest way to perhaps start to think about this, is what we call a coupled inquiry, where teachers set a base experiment or investigation, and then students from that investigation create their own questions of further investigation. That gives us the depth, because it's not just about doing something superficially, it's about getting that depth and having students think about what does this actually mean. With our senior curriculum that was developed nationally, we developed only 15 subjects. And you'll see there that in terms of science, we developed 4 sciences. We developed biology, chemistry, earth and environmental science, and physics. So at the post-compulsory levels, this is pre-university, at a national level, we developed 4 different sciences. We have a national assessment program. So we basically test literacy and numeracy every year at particular levels. So levels 3, 5, 7 and 9. And what we can do with that particular result is that we can map a student's progress on a continuum. So we can see how much they've improved every 2 years. So for every student in Australia, we map their literacy and numeracy skills, and teachers can make adjustments based on what those results are. We also have intermittent 3-yearly based assessments in science, literacy, in civics and citizenship, and in information and communication technologies. So that's a sample program, whereas the literacy and numeracy is for every student. So the question is, if we've now developed a national curriculum, but the responsibility for education is states and territories, how do the states and territories then interpret the national curriculum, but being honest to national curriculum, not losing anything that was agreed at a national level? And what I'm doing today is to give you the Victorian perspective of how we do that. Firstly, our government has particular educational priorities, and in particular the priorities that our government has that relates to science curriculum is that we do specify that we want literacy and numeracy enhanced, that the importance of STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, mathematics, is given a priority, and that the knowledge and skills necessary for participation in a digital world is important, as well as some of those capabilities in 21st century thinking skills. So, for example, looking at innovation, critical thinking, creative thinking, and learning how to learn. They're our government priorities, which we then apply to a national curriculum to say, how do we make sure that we achieve those through our curriculum? So in Victoria, we had some education state targets, and in particular, the one that relates to science is that we are going to measure our improvement in science, hopefully an improvement in science, through looking at our PISA results. So the PISA results will inform how well we're doing, as well as what next steps may we need to take to continue to improve. So comparing the Australian curriculum to the Victorian curriculum, we'll see that we have, it's very similar with some minor adjustments. So we have at the early years, as I said, from birth through to year 5, we have an early learning framework. In Victoria, we've extended the 5 to 8 years of age because some students don't start school until a bit later. We still have a Foundation to 10 Australian curriculum, but we also have a pre-foundation level curriculum for students with disabilities. So we have a specific curriculum for students who are not able to participate in the usual classes at those standard levels. At the senior level, we have used the national curriculum as a guide, and that was the instruction given at a national level that we have developed these curriculum in science, and they're only to be used as a guide. You can adjust and adapt to the needs that you want. So you'll see that in Victoria, we still have biology, we have chemistry, we don't have so much earth, but we do have environmental science, we have physics, we also have psychology. And psychology is a very popular subject in Victoria. It's probably the third most popular senior subject after English, which is compulsory, and mathematics, which parents think are compulsory. With our early years education, we do have a framework, and I have the reference there if you'd like to refer to the detail of that framework. With the Victorian curriculum, you'll see, if you do a comparison with the national, that we do have still the 8 learning areas, but instead of having 7 general capabilities, we actually have 4 capabilities. And what we've done is that we have actually incorporated the literacy, numeracy, and the information and communications technology within subjects, so they're integral to the subject. But these 4 other capabilities are separate, and teachers at schools are required to work out themselves at each school how they will include that in the curriculum. The difference between Victoria and national in terms of these capabilities, they're not called general, they're actually capabilities. We're devising assessments for them. So at each level from foundation through to year 10, each of these capabilities will be assessed in schools by teachers. So by assessing them, it places, in a sense, more importance to them because people need to actually think, how am I going to do that? So we thought that was an important thing. If we valued each of those particular capabilities, then you need to assess them and let students and let parents know how students are progressing in their development of those capabilities. In Victoria, schools have the autonomy to interpret the curriculum as they want to. So in a sense, those other curriculum elements are like building blocks. And each school can build its own structure, its own building, and they can put the building blocks together in any way they like to meet the needs of their schools and their students and their communities. They will still have the foundation elements that will be common across Australia, but they can build their own castles, their own homes, their own structures as they would like. And in school planning, schools work together. All the school works together to work out for a school how will the capabilities be included in the curriculum. How does their school ethos come into curriculum development? What is the extracurricular program the school offers in terms of sport, in terms of music, in terms of the arts, in terms of other things that the school offers? How does that come into a curriculum? So our notion of curriculum is about the whole school, and it involves whole school planning. How is science curriculum implemented in Victoria? You may remember that there were 3 strands in the Australian curriculum that Oh, I didn't go through that, sorry. There are 3 strands. There's the understanding, which is the classical knowledge. There are the science skills, which are the classical skills that we have. But the new part of the Australian curriculum, as far as science was concerned, was this new strand or new aspect called science as a human endeavour. Why was that included? Because our students a while ago we found were not being engaged in science. They did not find it interesting, and when we did the research, the reason that students did not find science interesting was that they did not see how it was relevant to their lives. They did not see why it was important to learn any of the things that they were learning. So the main feature of the Australian curriculum is that the notion of science as a human endeavour, why is it important to learn what we're doing, was included, and it's become a very important strand. And in Victoria, what you'll see is that we have actually combined the science and human endeavour within the science understanding, because there is no point having an understanding of something if you don't know why it's important. So we have structured our curriculum based on science content, and content includes why it's important and the endeavour and the skills. And all of those are linked. You'll see also that with the inquiry skills, very similar to the Australian curriculum, we have combined questioning and predicting. We think they go together. We've combined planning and conducting, recording and processing, analysing and evaluating, and communicating. They're the 5 aspects of scientific inquiry skills that are weaved in to the science understanding. Even at Foundation to 2, students are going to be expected to meet particular standards, and this is an example of a task where students had to build a mini beast hotel. So each student chose an insect or an invertebrate, and they had to construct a hotel. And before you can construct a hotel, you need to think about what the animal's needs are and how it's going to survive. So students had to think about what is it that these insects or invertebrates are going to need to survive, and they created a hotel. A very quick example, and it relates back, you then relate that back to the content and the skills. How does science understanding and science of human endeavour help teachers to personalise learning for students? And personalised learning is something that we pride ourselves on. In our PISA results, Australia's performance was probably above average, but what we were particularly good at was students really liking science. They love to come to science classes and they enjoy their science. So what is it that has made a difference? I do think that the science as a human endeavour has made a difference, and because that has enabled teachers to personalise their teaching and personalise students' learning. So how is that done? A typical science topic for us at Year 7, so students about 11, 12, is about cells. And our content description about cells is that cells are the basic units of living things and have specialised structures and functions. So you can probably imagine if you had that to teach, what sorts of topics you might do, what sorts of understandings you need to unpack. And the sorts of things that you might come up with, similar to what we would come up with, are things like microscopy, part of the skills, plant and animal cells and what the differences are, applications, cell types. So there are different things that you might think about in terms of how you might teach cells. But if you combine that particular content description with the understanding, and the understandings relate to, there are 3 there. So that one there relates to how scientific knowledge and understanding changes as new evidence becomes available. This one here relates to science develops in terms of collaboration. And the one over here relates to the relationship between science and technology. So those aspects of science of human endeavour is what teachers will weave into the content. So what does that look like? If we have a look at, we have our basic cells, we're looking at technology and the impact of technology. What sorts of applications are there? What is the human endeavour that is associated with these particular aspects? Why is it that we should be bothering to learn about cells at all? Why should we know whether a cell has a plant, has a cell wall or not? Why does it matter that students have to learn that? And some of the aspects, some of the applications that you can look at, so things like cloning, cryogenics, reversal of cell ageing. They've now found apparently something to be able to make you younger. I'm trying to find out what that source is. GM foods, genetically modified foods, stem cell therapies, skin cancers. They're the applications that students can learn. So with teachers teaching about cells, the personalisation is that students have a choice of what they want to explore and examine and report about. They make the choice. So teachers may teach some basic elements about cells. Students then negotiate and they can choose any topic related to cells. A different way that teachers are actually using the curriculum is that they're not using the content as a starting point for curriculum development. What they're using is the science of the human endeavour. So their question is, if the endeavour is talking about how technology impacts on science and what the implications are, the teachers will pick the actual topics first of all, whether it's cloning, whatever it might be, and they work backwards to then look at what the underpinning science is. There are different ways of using the endeavour. The endeavour also is different. It can actually change the way that you might teach something. So if you actually took the aspect of endeavour over here about science knowledge can develop through collaboration and connecting ideas across disciplines, then you're going to get a different set of applications that you might have a look at. And a particularly popular one in Australia is the work by Fiona Wood with the artificial skin. And the work there happened particularly, was particularly important after the Bali bombings, and certainly for burns victims, it's very important, that sort of research. So starting with what the application is and working backwards to the curriculum is what teachers are looking at. How do the embedded capabilities and cross-curriculum priorities apply? This is what we've done is we have embedded literacy in our curriculum. So right through there, teachers have to think about what are the literacies of science, what is the language of science. And this is an example, a primary example. It's sort of an Australian version of the Japanese haiku, that you can use poetry, for example, to be able to have students think about what the language is and think about the definitions and think about the interpretations. And this was simply looking at the notion of change, going from egg to chicken. You can use that example as any, lots of different examples, but having students explore the language specifically that is science related. So the literacy is embedded. We have numeracy embedded. And although it seems like a very simple activity, measuring the width of an egg or the circumference of an egg, you would think that is simple, the students would think that is simple, but it actually produces quite a lot of different data, and it actually raises in students' minds an idea about what is scientific accuracy. How accurate can we get? What can we use to be accurate? How can we be confident that a result is accurate? Exploring some of the accuracies of science and how we measure and what the validity is of those measurements is something that is particularly enabled by embedding the numeracy aspects of the curriculum. And then you can expand it further and have students come up with their own questions, and the sorts of questions that students have come up with are things like, do eggs with larger circumferences crack more easily? Or what are the factors that are going to affect the cracking of eggs? Is there a particular place in an egg that cracks more easily than others? What is the degree of precision with which we can measure things? And I think that notion of precision and the difference between precision and accuracy is well understood by students at very early levels. And doing things like using Archimedes' principles to measure the volume of an egg. So using different scientific techniques to be able to answer questions and to be able to think about what the science is. In terms of ICT, where does ICT come into it? How do we use technologies to be able to data capture, to be able to analyse? And very simple things like looking at patterns in data, so collecting data and being able to look at patterns and trying to explain them and taking time in class to be able to unpack some of that. Are brown hens better egg layers than white hens? Lots of different questions that students can explore through the use of ICT. Do brown eggs taste better? That's a bit more difficult to actually do scientifically. Some of the cross-curriculum priorities are embedded, so things like sustainability. You can ask questions like, Would you prefer to save the purple pig-nosed frog, or the giant panda? Which is it that is more important to save? There are lots of endangered species in the world. Which is it more important to save? And I have the curriculum connections there. It relates directly back to the curriculum in terms of what we're teaching in science. In particular, what this does is it brings in the capabilities of critical and creative thinking, so that for your ugly frog or your attractive panda, if you're looking at it in terms of critical thinking, students might be asked to discuss cases where species have been supported by public funding or research and consider how does being cute or ugly affect the survival chances of a species. And we know already with human endeavours that it has made a difference. Creative thinking. If you want to support the ugly frog being perpetuated because it is important in that whole ecosystem, then students might creatively think, how are you going to convince people to put their money into actually saving the ugly frog rather than putting their money into the cute panda? It raises some ethical issues as well. Medicine and fuel. An interesting aspect is that there's a particular yew tree that is used as a source of medicine or as a source of cancer treatment. But it also provides fuel for the local economy or the local people. So how do you decide whether, and this tree is now endangered, so should this tree be used to make medicines or to supply the local people with fuel? Again, things that students can discuss and that brings in the capabilities. Interdisciplinary ideas, things like this, that you can present data, you can present something that's unknown to students to say, is this a new insect? How are they going to know if this is a new insect, or is it just an old one that's had a wing or bits of legs cut off? And again, looking at proportions, looking at maths is a way to go. Pinball machines. You look at the science in terms of forces, look at the maths in terms of properties of circles, angles, design technologies. You can have a look at creating design solutions. Again, with students actually constructing, they are able to unpack what the science is and able to apply some of these cross-curriculum links. Looking at peer situations where you can have young students working with older students when there are topics that are in common. So, for example, having students make instruments, different instruments, they can work with the older students, and both of them are able to be able to explore their own aspects of a particular topic. So obviously the older one will be in more depth. Looking at music and chemistry, I've seen some beautiful programs where students actually photographed a chemical reaction and had to work out the right music to be able to accompany it to show what the chemical change was. It's very creative. The science skills are a continuum from primary school right through to the end of secondary school, so that there's a continual development. At senior level, we're finding that our enrolments are increasing, so we've got quite healthy numbers in the enabling sciences, so our science numbers are increasing in chemistry, biology and physics. And inquiry questions even persist at the senior level, so having things like in biology, is there a better way to measure the rate of photosynthesis when students have done it one particular way? It's again an example of a coupled experiment. I just want to go very quickly and finish my presentation with an actual case study of a primary school. So a primary school in the Dandenongs, it's a lovely area of Melbourne. They wanted to create what was called a learning landscape. What was the problem? The problem was that the school had this patch of land that was beautiful, but no one ever went there. No one did anything with it. So the students were given the brief, what would you do with this piece of land? These were the top 10 things that students wanted. They wanted water. They wanted to have water there. That was their top priority. They wanted animals. Wanted construction opportunities, a maze, a meeting place and a performance area, a pizza garden with a pizza oven, artwork and sculpture, secluded spaces and seating, edible plants and flowers, and an area to climb and play. So what they did was that they identified what had to be learnt. The teacher worked with the students to identify elements of the curriculum. You had to work out what students needed to know to be able to do that. And then students went about doing it. Students did it all. The site surveys, physical features, soil type, living things, they did animals and living things surveys, what actually is there. They had to collate data. They had to consult with the community to make sure the community were happy with their designs. They developed a concept for the garden design. They actually modelled it, so they had to model how it would work. There was a final concept plan when they worked out what worked and what didn't work. And their final landscape from nothing to that was achieved. So I'd like to thank you for being able to present to you.